Hey, Myles here at Tactical Hyve. We've been talking about multiple target engagements, but the question I have for you is, do you know what your lower body should be doing? What should your legs be doing? If you don't, make sure to tune in. All right, welcome back. Last week, we talked about what our hips are doing when it comes to multiple target engagements or target transitions. And just like our eyes, when we move our eyes to a target, if you've watched the series, and if you haven't, make sure to watch the playlist. Everything will make a lot more sense if you watch that. And if you have, then you know what I mean to your eyes. Where my eyes look, okay, our body will follow. And in the same way, where our hips begin to move, our legs are obviously going to have to move to accommodate where our hips are going to actually point towards. And we want our hips to point towards the target that we're engaging to establish our natural point of aim as much as possible. So there are different schools of thought when it comes to what your legs should be doing. So I'm just going to share two with you, and you can basically choose whichever one you want. You can experiment with both. You might find that you like one over the other, all right? So I will also talk about some of just the general pros and cons that you're going to hear out there. Again, figure out what you like best, and again, there's pros and cons to each one. So no matter which one you do, you're going to find people who say that, oh, you know, you might run into this issue. For this dry fire session, you don't really need a timer or any special gear. I still like to use the DryFireMag for every dry fire session because it's going to help you manipulate the trigger, but you don't really need to. Even if you didn't have your pistol, you can still work on dry transitions with your hips. So what we're going to cover now are the different techniques that people use. So there are different techniques that you are going to hear from different instructors. Probably the most common one that you're going to hear is as you begin to turn your hips to the next target, okay, you're going to feel your weight shift and you want to use your knees. I'm going to exaggerate my knee movement so you can see it on video. If I don't exaggerate, then it might be difficult. So if I start off here on a target to the right, and I'm going to transition to a target on the left here, I want to turn my hips, okay? And when I turn my hips, I might want to use this technique where I'm putting weight on my right side. So if I'm transitioning from right to left, notice how I'm exaggerating here. Look at my right knee. Right to left, notice how my right knee, exaggerating here, I am bending it. This allows me to keep my hips towards this left target. If I was going the opposite way from left to right, I'm now going to bend my left knee as my hips turn to the right target. Okay, notice my hips are exactly where I want them to be, adhering to what we discussed last week. That's happening because I'm using my knees to allow me to do that. Now, depending on the width of the transition, you may not need to bend so far. I'm just exaggerating again so that you can see everything. So in the dry fire session here, I might take a shot. Then as I transition, all of the basics we've discussed are going to apply. I bend my knee, my hips are facing the next target, I break my next shot, okay? Very, very simple. But there are some disadvantages to that, or some cons that people will talk to you about. For example, you know, you're torquing your knee there. It's not a good natural position. You know, it's not comfortable, okay? If you don't have any problems with it, then maybe this is for you. But that is probably the most common thing you're going to learn in terms of what your legs should be doing. Of course, when the targets are more narrow and not as wide as this, then you may only have a slight knee movement, which you might not see very well on camera. But again, if I'm moving from right to left, my right knee is going to bend slightly or even more depending on the width of the targets. From left to right, I'm bending my left knee. Okay, so I can turn my hips in there. The second method that you can practice doesn't require you to bend your knees. And there are pros and cons to this, or, you know, again, people will debate, no, it's not good because of this. Try both and figure out what you like best, because there are a lot of great shooters who use both methods. So the next method is I'm not going to bend my knees anymore, and all I'm going to do, take a look at my feet. I pivot on the ground and have my feet face the next target. Okay, notice that. My knees are slightly bent in an athletic stance, okay, but I'm not doing what I did previously, right? So if I'm moving right to left, I'm just going to pivot my feet so that my feet are now facing the next target. That automatically also turns my hips to that next target. So you can add all of your trigger presses here while you are doing the transitions. The disadvantage to that some people will talk about is some will argue that you're not as stable when you are moving here because you're pivoting, right? And again, it's not for me to say that it's right or wrong. Try it out. Again, there are really, really, really good shooters who use both methods completely fine. So at the end of the day, it's probably personal preference, what you find best, right? Now, perhaps maybe if you have knee problems, perhaps you don't want to do this, and perhaps you're just going to be turning this way. Okay, so try both out. And the dry fire session is really simple. It is going to be the same thing, kind of the same progression we did in the previous week. 1 shot to no shot, 1 shot to 1 shot, 2 shots to 1 shot, so on and so forth, back and forth. If you didn't watch last week's video, watch last week's video and it'll make more sense. But now the hyper focus is no longer on the hips, okay? Although we want to keep that in the back of our mind, we don't want to forget that. The hyper focus now is on what our legs are doing. As we begin to turn our hips to the next target, we are forcing ourselves to do something with our knees or our feet, right? Whichever method that you're choosing. So you might start off with bending the knee, okay? I'm exaggerating, again, just so you can see it, okay? For a narrow transition, you may not have to bend it that much, or you might want to do the feet, okay, where you're not bending the knees. So very simple dry fire session. Do a lot of reps while you are focusing in on just the technique itself. But at the end, you want to have that checklist. Do I have my hips there? Did I reset and prep? All of that good stuff, all the details that we discussed, okay? So now we're going to talk about the live fire session here. It is somewhat, similar. So there's really no, remember, live fire is more of a validation of what we're doing. And you'll notice that these techniques can be done without any gun in your hand because we're now focusing on lower body and what, our hips are doing, what our knees are doing, and or feet. But the gun, and when you're shooting live ammo, it can distract people. People just get anxious and it might make them forget because now they're focused more on what's going on here, the explosion, and things go wacko, right? So I'm gonna load up some rounds and we'll just talk about a few more details, but overall, it should be exactly what you're doing with dry fire. All right, so I have targets down range. It doesn't really matter what the arrangement is. You can start off with 2 targets and as you progress, then add more targets. Everything is the same. You're gonna start with 1 shot, then no shot, okay? Just transition. 1 shot to 1 shot, 2 shots to 1 shot, 2 shots to 2 shots, so on and so forth, okay? You don't have to go crazy, really high, but the focus again is gonna be on the legs. So if you're brand new to this and you've never really thought about it, pick one method and try it out a number of times. Give it a fair share, all right, of repetitions, and then try the next method, give it a fair share, and kind of see which one comes natural to you. And, if you want to be thorough, you want to work both methods, okay? So the first method, I am going to do 2 target arrays here just to it's going to be hard to see what my knees are doing when I do the first transition here, but I do want to see what happens with a narrow transition here. Okay, so first I'm going to take these wider targets, the paper targets. This one I'm going to exaggerate a little bit. I'm going to move from left to right. So my left knee is going to bend a little bit. So left to right. Now I'm going to do right to left. If I'm going right to left, my right knee is going to bend. Right to left. Notice how I stop on the next target, following all the fundamentals that we've talked about. Then I'm not going to go through the whole thing because you know what's next. Then you would go a little bit faster. Then once you're comfortable with the speed, then you increase the repetitions as we did last week. But before we move on, I do want to focus now on a narrow transition. So look at those 2 poppers there. It seems like there's, they're very close, but still, when they're very close, I also still want to move my legs here. It's going to be very hard to see, so I'll exaggerate just a tad, okay? But if you're not moving your knees, this is how it would look like. Okay, I missed that second one. I wasn't really paying attention. I was actually thinking about, okay, should I actually move my legs or not? But that one, literally just my upper body is moving. And that you can still get away with it. That's completely okay. If you want to be a little bit more thorough so that you're building these good habits for all of your transitions, even when it is narrow like this, you want to have a slight bend. I don't know if you saw that. Pay attention to my left knee. There's a slight bend. Slight bend, okay? And I'm taking the same approach, 1 shot to no shot, 1 shot to 1 shot, increase the speed. Then when I'm comfortable, 2 shots to 1 shot. When I'm comfortable, increase the speed, so on and so forth. So the knees, if you're using the knee method, there should be a slight bend even with a narrow transition, even the slightest, okay? If I show you, let me just actually do it for real here. You might not see it because I'm wearing pants, but there was the slightest bend, okay, on my left. That allows me to ensure my hips are pointed on that next target. Because remember, when my hips turn, that is going to force my legs to move, whether you're using the second method or the first method, okay? So you need to make sure you're allowing your body to move so that you have your hips pointed to the next target. Now the next method, and I'll do this from right to left now, is the feet. And it's just very simple, right? So my feet are maybe facing this target right here. Now when I break the shot, I pivot and I am now at the next target. This doesn't require me to use my knees whatsoever, so it's more comfortable for those of you who have knee issues, knee problems, all right? So you don't have to worry. This is something that you would do the same approach progressively. Then for narrow transitions, notice this, with narrow transitions here, you wouldn't have to do that much. You're not gonna see people do this, okay? That is one of the, I guess, one of the criticisms too, is if you are not hyper aware of what proper transitions be like, where your hips are facing each other, you still can accomplish this completely fine and still be successful. You can hit your targets. But if you want optimal performance, right, your hips should be completely aligned even with a narrow transition. And when you're using the foot method, right, some people are going to say that some people might not move their feet anymore. And there's, again, I'm not even into the debates. There are people who are saying it's not needed, so on and so forth. It's neither here or there for this video, nor do I really care. So what you want to do is figure out what you find, what's most comfortable for you, and then implement that, all right? For narrow transitions though, try to keep your hips. Let's say if you are using that second method where people turn their feet, okay? Just remember here, you don't need to turn your feet to turn your hips. Notice I'm going to exaggerate. Notice how my feet are in the same direction. I can still turn my hips. Right? So just ensure you are doing that if you're using this method. Now clearly if the targets are wider, when you turn your feet, your hips are going to turn automatically. But for the narrow ones, they may not. Okay? So very simple live fire session today. Remember, as you are doing this here, okay, I'm just going to do that rep 2 with the feet here, another rep. As you're doing this, when I stop, I want to ensure, do I have my hips pointed at the target, just like I'm supposed to, and then go through your entire checklist of everything we've done in this series. It's a lot, guys. We've covered a lot. So if you think this, everything we're covering this week is simple, this is just another opportunity for you to reinforce the fundamentals that we've covered. All right, that wraps up today's video. It's all in the hips, guys. You want to make sure you're turning your hips towards the target, but in order to do that successfully, you also need to move your lower body properly. And I showed you 2 methods there. Your knees can actually bend to get your hips towards the target, or you just pivot your feet. There are pros and cons to both. Give it a try, both, and see which one works best for you. As always, if you like the video, let us know by giving us a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, let us know below. And don't forget to subscribe. See you guys next week.